This is my story. After raising my daughter alone for years, I thought respect was the least she'd give back. I worked hard, saved every penny, and built a life meant to protect her. But one evening, in front of others, she looked at me with disgust and said, "You're a loser." That moment broke something inside me. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I simply decided it would be the last time she ever saw me as weak. What I did next changed everything. Before I tell you, comment where you're watching from, and please subscribe so my stories reach more people. I spent most of my life working when everyone else was asleep. I wasn't born rich. Every brick, every meal, every piece of furniture in that house came from my sweat. When my wife died, I made one promise. My daughter would never struggle like we did. I worked double shifts, skipped meals, and took side jobs fixing engines at night just to keep her in school. When other fathers took vacations, I took debts. When others rested, I counted bills. But every ache felt worth it because she smiled at me with trust in her eyes. I saved for her future in silence, her tuition, her clothes, her car, even the house she called her own. They all came from my hands. I didn't buy luxuries for myself. My comfort was watching her grow. I thought money was only valuable when it built love. When she went abroad to study, I sold my old tools and emptied my savings so she'd never feel embarrassed of her father. I told everyone, she'll make something of herself. My girl will go further than I ever could. Years went by. She graduated, got married, and started living the kind of life I once dreamed of for her. I was proud, even if it meant being forgotten sometimes. She'd call only when she needed something. Papers signed, loans guaranteed, or advice she never listened to. I told myself it was fine. That's what fathers were for. To give until they had nothing left to give. But there's a difference between love and being used. I didn't see it then, but she had already stopped seeing me as a person. When her husband lost his job, I paid their mortgage. When they wanted to start a business, I gave them the down payment. I thought I was helping. I thought it would keep our bond strong. But every check I wrote didn't buy closeness. It bought distance. Gratitude disappeared, replaced by entitlement. My help became her expectation. I wasn't dad anymore. I was a wallet with wrinkles. The worst part was how blind I was to it. I still waited for her calls, still smiled when she visited once a year. I told my friends, she's busy, she has a family. Even when I knew that wasn't true, I convinced myself her silence meant she was happy. Deep down, I was scared to admit she had outgrown me, not because she succeeded, but because she'd stopped caring. Then came that night, the dinner where she humiliated me. It didn't happen suddenly. Disrespect grows quietly, like rust on steel. I had ignored her tone, her rolling eyes, her impatient sighs. I excused it all as stress. But when she called me a loser in front of her friends, it wasn't anger I felt, it was clarity. I realized I'd raised someone who valued money but never learned what it took to earn it. I had taught her comfort, not character. I didn't sleep that night. I sat alone in my small study, staring at the old photograph of us when she was a child, sitting on my shoulders, laughing like the world was ours. Somewhere between then and now, she'd forgotten who built that world for her. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I'd protected her too much from struggle, from reality, from consequences. But if love had made her blind, maybe loss would make her see. By morning, my sadness had hardened into resolve. I wasn't going to shout, argue, or explain. Words meant nothing anymore. I'd spent decades giving, and she'd spent years taking. It was time for her to learn what it felt like to live without expecting me to save her. I had one final lesson left to teach, not through punishment, but through disappearance. That's when I opened my drawer, took out the folder of papers I'd kept hidden for decades, investments, property deeds, and accounts she didn't know existed. The fortune she thought was hers had always been mine, and for the first time in years, I smiled, not out of joy, but because I finally understood my worth didn't depend on her approval. It happened so fast that even now, I can still hear her voice like it's carved into my bones. That evening, she had friends over, people from her new world, the kind that judged success by cars, brands, and bank accounts. I sat at the edge of the dining table, listening quietly, trying not to interrupt. I had brought a small cake from the shop nearby just to celebrate her recent business deal. I thought it would make her smile. Instead, it made her roll her eyes. She laughed, not at the cake, but at me. That laughter was the start of everything that followed. At first, I thought she was joking. But when she called me a loser, there was no humor in her voice. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was disgust. The room went silent for a second, and then one of her friends awkwardly laughed to break the tension. My daughter didn't apologize. She looked straight at me, almost daring me to respond. I didn't. I just stared at her and realized that the girl I had raised was gone. In her place stood someone I didn't recognize, someone who measured worth in things, not people. The word loser stayed in the air long after her guests left. It echoed louder than any argument we'd ever had. I went to my room quietly, pretending to be tired. But inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: shame. Not because she insulted me, but because I had allowed myself to be reduced to that point. I had given her everything: my money, my years, my health, my future. And yet, standing there that night, I realized she looked at me not as a father, but as a failure. I replayed that moment over and over, wondering what I had done wrong. Maybe I was too soft. Maybe I should have been stricter when she was younger. Maybe love had blinded me to the arrogance growing inside her. But the truth was simple. She didn't respect me anymore because she never had to work for anything. I had made life too easy for her, and in doing so, I had made myself disposable. When I sat down later that night, I could still hear her laughter mixing with the clinking of glasses. It reminded me of when she was little, how she used to laugh at my jokes, how she'd run to the door when I came home from work. I remembered her small hands reaching for mine when she was scared of thunder. Those hands once clung to me as if I was her whole world. Now they pointed at me like I was a burden. That realization hurt more than any word she could have said. For hours, I stared at the photo frame on my desk, her graduation picture. I'd been so proud that day. She wore her cap and gown, tears in her eyes as she said, "I did it, Dad." What I didn't realize back then was that she meant, "I did it without you." That night, I understood it clearly. She had outgrown gratitude. She didn't see my sacrifices anymore, only what she thought I lacked. Still, I didn't confront her. Anger wasn't going to change her. Shouting wouldn't fix years of entitlement. So I did what I had always done, stayed quiet. But this time, my silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. I decided she would never get another chance to humiliate me. The man she called a loser would soon become the ghost she'd never be able to find. Before I went to bed, I tore up the check I had written for her new business plan. $50,000 she said she needed urgently. I placed the torn pieces in the bin and stared at them for a long time. That paper had once represented love and trust. Now it was freedom. I finally saw that her dependence on me wasn't love, it was control. And I was done being controlled. By morning, my mind was clear. I had no bitterness left, just resolve. I wasn't going to punish her. I wasn't going to shout or explain. She had already shown me what she thought of me. Now, it was time I showed her what she had lost. A father's patience has limits, and mine had reached its end. That night was different. The house felt colder than usual, like even the walls had heard what she said. I sat alone in my room, the lights off, listening to the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Every sound felt louder. The creak of the floor, the hum of the fridge, the echo of her words. "You're a loser." It replayed again and again in my head until the silence became unbearable. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad anymore. I just felt empty, like I'd spent my whole life pouring myself into something that never saw the value of what it received. I walked to my study, where I kept old papers, receipts, and certificates. The drawer was heavy with memories, years of work, every contract, every investment I'd ever made. My wife's photo sat on the table beside me. She had passed too early, but she'd warned me once. Don't let love blind you to disrespect. I never understood that until that night. Love had made me weak. It had made me believe that patience would fix everything. But now I saw clearly. Some people don't learn through kindness. They only understand consequences. I started pulling out folders one by one. My pension plan, fixed deposits, real estate deeds, all of it still under my name. The house my daughter lived in, the car she drove, the accounts she thought belonged to her, all funded by me. Every piece of paper was proof that I wasn't a loser. I had built everything from scratch. The only mistake I made was giving too much, too soon. For the first time in years, I opened my old safe, something I hadn't touched since my wife's passing. Inside were 2 passports, a few envelopes of cash, and one small metal box. The box contained a list of my offshore investments, money that even my daughter didn't know existed. I had created it decades ago for emergencies, in case everything ever fell apart. I smiled faintly. Maybe this was the emergency my wife had always warned me about. I poured myself a small drink and sat down with the documents. I thought about every moment I had sacrificed for her, the nights I walked home hungry, the holidays I skipped, the illnesses I ignored. I had done it all so she'd never have to struggle, and yet she called me worthless. That was the moment I realized something. She would never see my worth until she felt my absence. The clock struck midnight. The house was completely dark. I sat in silence, making decisions in my head that I never thought I'd have to make. I decided I would disappear. No goodbyes, no explanations, no drama. Just gone. She had taken my love for granted, but she would never get to take my peace. I would vanish with everything I had built, every cent, every brick, every trace of my existence in her world. Before going to bed, I wrote a short note and kept it in my drawer. When you realize what you lost, don't come looking. I've already forgiven you. It wasn't meant for revenge. It was closure. For me. I had spent decades living for others. Now, for the first time, I would live for myself. As I lay down, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the years that had passed. The house was filled with her laughter once, her footsteps, her dreams. Now it was just me, the man who built the foundation she stood on, treated like a stranger in his own home. I wasn't leaving out of anger. I was leaving out of self-respect. And that night, I finally felt free. When dawn arrived, I was already packed. Just one small suitcase, my wife's photograph, and the folder of documents. I didn't need anything else. The air felt fresh, the sun warm. I stood at the doorway for a moment, looking around the home I had built. It was beautiful. Not because of what it held, but because of what it had taught me. That love without respect is nothing but quiet slavery. The morning after she called me a loser, I woke up before the sun. My body was tired, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I had a plan. It wasn't built from anger or spite. It came from realization. For decades, I had been building a life around other people's comfort. That morning, I decided to build one around my own. I started with the small things. I packed a single suitcase, one pair of clothes, a few documents, and my wife's photograph. I didn't need much. Everything else in that house had lost its meaning. Every object reminded me of how blind love can be when it turns into obligation. Then I brewed myself a cup of tea, the same way I had done every morning for 30 years, but this time it tasted different, stronger. It tasted like finality. After breakfast, I sat at my old desk and opened my files. The first call I made was to my banker. My voice was steady as I asked him to transfer the money from all my known accounts into the hidden one I had created years ago. It was an account registered quietly under a secondary identity, meant for emergencies. I'd almost forgotten it existed until that night. Now, it was my lifeline. Within 2 hours, $1.8 million had moved. Money I had earned through decades of hard work, saved penny by penny. Next, I called my lawyer, the only person I trusted outside my family. He was an old friend from my working years, a man who understood silence better than explanations. I asked him to prepare a few legal transfers. Every property, vehicle, and account that carried my daughter's name as a co-owner was to be reverted solely to mine. No announcements, no discussions, no notifications. Just paperwork done quietly, efficiently, and legally. By afternoon, it was complete. I didn't bother checking the house or taking inventory of what I was leaving behind. Furniture, clothes, gifts, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was that I had finally taken back control of my life. I walked through each room once, not with sadness, but with closure. I stood in the living room and remembered the birthdays we celebrated there, the laughter, the chaos, the love. All of it felt distant now, like memories from another lifetime. In my study, I found the photo album from my daughter's childhood. I flipped through the pages, her first day at school, her graduation, her wedding. Each photo told a story of sacrifice and hope. I smiled faintly, not out of bitterness but out of understanding. I had fulfilled my duty as a father. The rest of my life was mine to live as I wished. I closed the album gently, placed it on the shelf, and walked away. By evening, everything was set. The lawyer confirmed that all assets were transferred and my offshore account was secure. I sold a few minor investments through online channels and converted a portion to cash. Every move was quiet, careful, impossible to trace back immediately. I knew it would take days before my daughter realized anything had changed. That was enough time for me to be long gone. Before leaving, I wrote her one last note and left it on the kitchen table. It wasn't cruel or emotional. Just honest. When you look for me, you'll find only yourself, it said. Everything you built came from me. Everything I'm taking back is mine. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. As the sun began to set, I locked the door, slipped the key into my pocket, and stepped outside. The air was still. The sky had a strange calmness to it, as if the world itself knew I was leaving something behind for good. I called a taxi from the end of the street and didn't look back once. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running toward responsibility. I was walking toward freedom. And the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful. Leaving wasn't hard. Staying would have been. The moment I closed that door behind me, I felt something shift. Not sadness, not regret, just relief. The taxi pulled up to the end of the street, headlights cutting through the early morning mist. The driver asked where I was headed. I told him to drive to the train station. That was all. I didn't need a destination yet. I just needed distance. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that only happens when the world hasn't woken up. As we drove, I looked out the window and saw the same shops I'd passed for years. The bakery where I'd bought her favorite pastries. The school bus stop where I used to wait every morning when she was a little girl. Every corner held a memory, but none of them hurt anymore. It was strange. Freedom doesn't always come with joy. Sometimes it comes with stillness. At the station, I withdrew a few bundles of cash from the nearest ATM using the secondary card linked to my offshore account. I bought a one-way ticket under a different name and boarded a train heading north. No one noticed me. I was just another old man with a suitcase, blending into the crowd of travelers. It felt peaceful to be invisible again. For the next few hours, I watched the countryside blur by through the window. The world outside looked alive. Fields, rivers, and hills stretching endlessly. I thought about how I had spent decades chasing stability, saving every penny, worrying about everyone else's future. But what was the point if the people you did it for couldn't even look at you with respect? That thought hurt, but it also healed. Because now, I wasn't doing this for anyone else. I was doing it for me. When I reached the next city, I checked into a modest hotel under my old business alias. No one questioned it. Age has a strange power. People assume you're harmless. That night, I sat by the window, listening to the faint hum of traffic and watching the lights below. For the first time in years, I didn't have to answer calls, manage problems, or hear anyone's complaints. The silence was mine. Back home, My daughter must have been panicking by then. I imagined her walking around the house, calling my name, checking my room, and realizing my things were gone. She would have gone through the documents, only to find nothing. No accounts, no titles, no access. Everything she thought belonged to her had vanished overnight. The man she called a loser had taken his life, and her comfort, with him. By the end of the week, my lawyer confirmed the transfers had gone through smoothly. The house was legally reclaimed, and her name was removed from every financial record. The only thing she'd find left behind was the note on the table. I could picture her reading it, confused, angry, maybe even scared. But it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't there to see it. The news spread among neighbors, of course. He disappeared, they'd say. No one knows where he went. Some called it selfish. Others called it brave. I called it necessary. I had spent years being visible to people who never really saw me. Disappearing was the only way to make them notice. Over the next few months, I moved between quiet coastal towns, always paying in cash, always staying in small inns. I became a ghost in my own story. Sometimes I'd read the paper and see articles about the missing millionaire father. I'd chuckle softly. They didn't know that I wasn't missing. I was finally found. At night, I'd sit by the shore, listening to the sound of waves crashing against the rocks. It reminded me of my wife. She used to say that life always comes back in waves, that no matter how far something drifts, it finds its way home eventually. Maybe I hadn't lost everything after all. Maybe I had just returned to myself. 3 days after I vanished, the calls began. Dozens of them. Missed calls, messages, voicemails, all from my daughter. But I didn't answer a single one. I had nothing left to say. By the 5th day, the tone of her messages had changed from annoyance to panic. She had gone to the bank and found every account empty. Her name was no longer linked to a single asset. The house she lived in had been repossessed by the bank since the property transfer was complete. She didn't own a thing, not even the car parked in her driveway. Then came the letter. My lawyer sent it exactly as I had requested, 1 week after my disappearance. It was short and formal, sealed in an envelope with her name printed neatly across it. Inside was a single note written by me. You called me a loser. I simply left the game you were playing. Along with that note was a stack of legal documents confirming the transfer of every asset, land, accounts, investments, and business shares, all under my sole ownership again. She wasn't just cut out of the will. She was erased from every financial trace of my life. When she received the letter, she called my lawyer repeatedly, demanding answers, but he told her only what was written in the file. Your father has retired from his old life and is no longer reachable. Those were my exact instructions. No one was to reveal where I'd gone or what I planned to do next. The news spread quickly. Neighbors whispered about how I had run away with millions. Reporters started calling it the vanished millionaire case. My daughter gave tearful interviews, saying I was mentally unstable and that she feared for my safety. I didn't need to watch them, but sometimes, out of curiosity, I did. I'd sit in my small rented room by the sea and watch her fake sorrow play out on television. The same woman who had called me useless was now begging for me to come home, not because she missed me, but because she missed what I gave her. It didn't take long for her to realize the depth of her loss. The bills came first: mortgage, utilities, insurance, all unpaid. Then the creditors started calling. The house she thought was hers, it had never been fully transferred. She was living in a property I had bought, under a trust I controlled. When the payment stopped, the bank took it back. The car, too, was financed under my business account, which was now closed. Within a month, her entire lifestyle collapsed. She moved into a rented apartment, sold her jewelry, and cut off friends who once came for her lavish parties. Every newspaper headline made her smaller. Every story turned her arrogance into public pity. She couldn't hide anymore. Meanwhile, I was far away, in a small fishing town on the coast. No one there knew my name or my story. I lived simply, a rented cottage, morning walks by the shore, tea at the local cafe. The world I'd built around my daughter's comfort had turned into my own prison, and walking away was the only way out. I didn't feel joy watching her fall. I didn't even feel anger anymore. What I felt was clarity. She had taken everything for granted, and life had finally shown her that nothing is guaranteed. Money can vanish, but lessons don't. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about calling her, just once, to say that I was alive. But then, I'd remember her words. "You're a loser, Dad." That memory always stopped me, because I realized, for the first time, she was right. I had been a loser. I lost myself in the love of a child who didn't deserve it. That loss was the reason I disappeared. After the letter was delivered and the media storm began, my daughter started searching for me everywhere. She contacted police departments, hired private investigators, and even pleaded with old family friends for leads. She told them all I had disappeared suddenly, claiming she was worried for my safety. But everyone who knew us saw through it. Her worry wasn't about my safety. It was about her inheritance. The police ran their routine checks. My car was still parked outside the house, untouched. My passport record showed no recent travel, and my bank accounts, the ones she knew about, were already closed. It was as if I had evaporated. The investigators followed every possible trail: hospitals, airports, old business addresses. They found nothing. I had planned every step too carefully for them to trace. Reporters kept knocking on her door, filming her outside the empty house. She looked fragile for the first time, not proud, not loud, just lost. The same cameras that once captured her laughing at her expensive parties now showed her crying on her own doorstep. She wanted sympathy. What she got instead was silence. The public had heard my side of the story through anonymous tips my lawyer released. They knew what she had said to me. "You're a loser." That single sentence became the headline of her downfall. As weeks passed, her desperation grew. She started visiting places from my past, my old office, the cafe I used to frequent, even the small fishing docks I loved. She thought she could find me there. But she never understood that I wasn't just hiding from her. I was living free for the first time. Meanwhile, I read about her search in the local newspapers of the coastal town where I'd settled. Every article painted a clearer picture of how the mighty had fallen. "Millionaire's daughter begs for father's return. He left and took everything." Each headline was another page in the story I had written through action, not words. I rented a small room above a quiet grocery store, run by an old couple who asked no questions. Every morning I'd wake before dawn, take a walk by the beach, and watch the fishermen pull their nets in. The air smelled of salt and honesty, both things I had been missing for years. One evening, while reading by the window, I saw a familiar car pull into the village square. My heart froze. It was her, my daughter. Somehow, she had found this place. She stepped out of the car, dressed simply for once, carrying a small handbag. Her eyes looked tired. She asked the locals about me, showing my photograph. They shook their heads politely, pretending not to know anything. I had told them beforehand. If anyone asked, I didn't exist. From my window, I watched her walk around the pier, calling my name softly. For a moment, I almost opened the door. Almost. But then I remembered the pain in her words, the years of being treated like a burden. She had never come looking for me out of love, only out of loss. I stayed still. After an hour, she gave up, sat on a bench facing the water, and cried quietly. Then she drove away. I never saw her again. A few months later, a journalist published a feature story about the vanished father who outsmarted his greedy heir. It spread fast. People admired the man who had walked away with his dignity. They called it poetic justice. I didn't care about fame, but I knew one thing. She would read that story. She would know that I was alive, but far beyond her reach. In the end, Her search wasn't about finding me. It was about trying to find forgiveness for herself, something no lawyer or newspaper could give her. I didn't disappear to punish her. I disappeared to teach her that no matter how much money you lose, losing someone's respect costs more. Years passed quietly after that day at the pier. The world had moved on, but my story had not been forgotten. I became a rumor, a headline, a mystery that never quite faded. Some said I died overseas. Others believed I was living under a new name. My daughter never confirmed or denied any of it. The truth was simple. I was alive, and I had finally found peace. But the real twist came one morning when I opened the local paper. A small article on the last page caught my eye. It mentioned a new charity that had been formed under my name, the Second Chance Fund. It supported single parents, widows, and the elderly who had been abandoned by their children. The address listed for donations was one I recognized. It was the same bank account I had created years ago before vanishing. My lawyer had followed through exactly as I instructed before disappearing. To release the funds after 5 years of confirmed inactivity. Every dollar of that $1.8 million now belonged to people who would value it more than anyone in my bloodline ever did. I wasn't trying to buy forgiveness or attention. I just wanted my story to mean something. That money was earned through pain, sacrifice, and endless work. It was meant to build love, but instead, it had built entitlement. Giving it away felt like the only clean way to end that legacy. My daughter found out through the media. They ran a segment showing her reaction, the tears, the disbelief, the anger. She said, that money was supposed to be family property. But family isn't built with money. It's built with time, care, and respect. All things she had lost long before I ever left. The comments under that article said everything. He didn't abandon her. She abandoned him first. Later, through a mutual acquaintance, I learned she visited the foundation's office one afternoon. She asked to see the director and requested proof of where the funds had gone. They showed her records, donations to care homes, scholarships for orphans, and community kitchens. The money had changed hundreds of lives already. People who had no one to care for them now had roofs, meals, and hope. All from the wealth she thought was hers. She stayed quiet for a long time after that. I never heard her name in the news again. But sometimes I'd receive a letter at my small coastal post office. No return address, no signature, just a few lines in familiar handwriting. One of them said, "You were right." I understand now. I never replied. I didn't need to. The message wasn't for me. It was for her own peace. Over time, I became something of a myth in that town. The locals would whisper about the old man with the calm eyes, who always paid for others' meals, but lived simply. I didn't correct them. I didn't want recognition. I had already lived the first half of my life chasing validation, from my daughter, from success, from the world. The second half was mine alone. One day, a young man from the charity visited me. He said, "Sir, we've helped more than 3,000 families now. People call you a hero." I smiled faintly and said nothing. Heroes are made of courage. I was made of regret turned into purpose. At night, I'd sit by my small window and listen to the waves hit the rocks. Sometimes, I'd wonder if my daughter ever truly forgave me, or herself. But then I realized it didn't matter anymore. Some wounds never close, but they stop bleeding when you stop touching them. The truth was never about revenge. It was about closure. She had taken everything she could from me, respect, time, emotion, but she never took my will to start over. By walking away, I hadn't lost a daughter. I had regained myself. After years of silence and distance, peace came quietly, not with a grand ending, but with ordinary mornings. My cottage by the sea became more than a hiding place. It became home. The walls were plain, the bed creaked, and the kitchen smelled faintly of salt and old wood, but it was mine. No arguments, no raised voices, just the sound of the ocean reminding me that even storms have a rhythm before they fade. I lived simply, my routine never changed. Mornings began with tea on the porch as the sun rose over the water. I'd feed the stray cats that gathered by the fence, then walk to the market to buy bread and milk. The grocer always greeted me with a smile and never asked about my past. People here didn't care about who you were before, only who you were now. For a man who had been judged, insulted, and used by his own blood, that was freedom. Every month, I'd receive reports from the Charity Foundation through my lawyer. They arrived in neat brown envelopes, updates about the families helped, homes built, and scholarships granted. I'd read each page slowly, sometimes aloud, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: pride, not the kind that comes from success or wealth, but from purpose. My money was finally doing what I had always hoped, making lives better. There was one story that stayed with me. A young single mother wrote a letter saying, "I was about to give up, but your fund saved my children." I kept that letter by my bedside. Her words were everything my daughters never were: grateful, kind, human. I didn't need her to know my name. I just needed to know that I had done something good before the end. At times, loneliness tried to creep back in. Old memories would return, birthdays forgotten, harsh words replayed, and the image of my daughter crying at the pier. But instead of bitterness, I felt something softer: pity. She had been blinded by greed, not evil. She had chased things that never last. Maybe she thought money meant power or control. But real power was walking away with your dignity intact. Sometimes I'd see families walking by the shore, fathers carrying toddlers, teenagers laughing beside them. I'd smile and watch quietly, not jealous, just observant. I had learned that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who show you kindness without asking for anything in return. In that small town, I had more warmth from strangers than I'd ever received from my own child. As the years passed, my hair turned fully white and my hands trembled when holding a pen. I started writing a diary, not about loss, but about lessons. I wrote about hard work, patience, and the danger of raising children who value comfort over gratitude. I planned to leave it with the foundation when I died, not for my daughter, but for anyone who might need to learn from my mistakes. In the evenings, I'd sit by the sea with a cup of tea and watch the sky change color. I used to think peace was something you found after forgiveness, but I realized peace comes when you stop expecting apologies. When you stop explaining yourself to people who never tried to understand you. I never saw my daughter again, though I sometimes wondered if she ever found happiness. Maybe she remarried, maybe she found work, maybe she learned to live without luxury. Whatever her path, I hoped she learned the lesson that took me decades to see. Love without respect dies slowly, and money can't buy it back. When the end came closer, I wasn't afraid. I had no unfinished business, no debts, no guilt. Just a quiet sense of balance, the kind that comes when life finally stops demanding explanations. The same ocean that had once felt like a stranger now felt like an old friend. I didn't die rich, I died free. And for a man like me, that was more than enough. Now, as an old man sitting by the sea, I often think about everything that happened. Not with anger, not even with sadness, but with understanding. Time has a strange way of softening the edges of memory. The things that once felt unbearable now feel like chapters in a long book I've already finished reading. My daughter's voice, her insults, her silence, they don't echo anymore. They're just quiet reminders of what I survived. People in the town still talk about me sometimes. They call me the man who disappeared with millions. Some admire me, others think I was cruel. But none of them really know the truth. I didn't vanish for revenge. I vanished for peace. I didn't want to teach her pain. I wanted to show her consequence. There's a difference. Revenge wants to see the other person suffer. Consequence lets them see themselves. I spent my entire life trying to be the father I never had, patient, kind, always giving. But somewhere along the line, I forgot that being a parent doesn't mean letting your children take everything from you, including your dignity. Respect isn't inherited, it's earned, by both sides. When she called me a loser, it wasn't just a cruel word. It was proof that I had failed to teach her what truly matters. After I disappeared, I learned something I wish I'd understood sooner. Silence is powerful. When you stop explaining yourself to people who already decided not to listen, you free yourself. I had spent years trying to make her proud, to make her see me as successful, as strong. But the truth was, I didn't need her approval. I just needed to forgive myself for raising her in comfort without gratitude. Sometimes I still look at the sky and imagine her somewhere under the same clouds, maybe wondering if I ever forgave her. And I did. Not because she asked for it, but because holding on to bitterness feels heavier than any burden. Forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone back into your life. It just means you've stopped letting them live in your head. The charity continued to grow even after I was gone. The foundation's workers told stories of elderly parents who were abandoned but found new hope. Every time they helped someone, a small part of me felt healed. That money didn't build mansions or pay for luxury. It built dignity, something far more valuable. If anyone ever finds my story, I want them to understand this. Love doesn't mean blind sacrifice. There's a point when giving too much stops being love and starts being surrender. I reached that point and decided I wouldn't die a broken man begging for respect from his own child. I'd rather die alone with honor than live surrounded by people who saw me as nothing. Sometimes people ask if I ever regretted leaving. The answer is no. I regret staying too long in a life where I wasn't valued. I regret thinking that family loyalty could exist without kindness. But leaving? That was the first honest thing I ever did for myself. I may never know what became of her. Maybe she learned, maybe she didn't. But I hope one day, when she looks at herself in the mirror, she sees not the money she lost, but the man she lost, and realizes what those words cost her. In the end, my story isn't about wealth or revenge. It's about reclaiming peace when the world takes it away. I left behind noise, pride, and pain, and found calm, silence, and purpose.